Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another Watchman Report. This is Marco Ponce of BeingJustified.com. And today it is Thursday, October 9th, 2025. A very interesting day as we hear about the ceasefire in Gaza. Today we have a special guest that I wanted to bring on the show that has to do with a very interesting country that very few people talk about. And he has a brand new book that features the actual sovereign and king of Jordan. And we're going to have on today Aaron Magid, and he came out with a brand new book called The Most American King, Abdullah of Jordan. And today we're going to discuss this book along with the relationship of Jordan throughout modern day Israel and also throughout the tenure of Abdullah. So with that said, I did want to introduce him. He used to be, I don't know if you still are, but he used to be Amman-based. He used to be a journalist there. He has a bunch of analysis that has appeared on Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, Al Monitor, the Atlantic Council, France 24, Al Jazeera, and the Middle East Institute. So without further ado, let's introduce Aaron. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. And listen, with all that said, can you give us a little introduction to yourself and also as to why you came about with this book and what interested you, first of all, with the Middle East and more specifically, Jordan?
Sure. So I used to be a journalist in Amman in 2015 and 2016. Have been very interested in the country, and even though I returned to the United States, I now live in Maryland. I continued writing about the Hashemite kingdom. In 2022, when I started research for this book, I noticed that King Abdullah had been in power for over 2 decades, yet not a single comprehensive biography had been written about him. So there was a gap in the literature, and he played such a critical role in the region and also had such a strong relationship with the United States. So I thought a book about solely focused on him would be appropriate. There's been much written about his father, King Hussein, but the current king less so. In terms of my interest in the Middle East in general, I grew up in the 9/11 Iraq War generation. So the Middle East was critical in international affairs growing up. And I wanted to understand the other side, what was happening, why there were these attacks both on 9/11, and then why did America get involved in Iraq. So I studied Arabic at college at the University of Michigan, and then continuing overseas. Both I spent some time in Morocco and in Jordan, in East Jerusalem. So that's how I got interested in the region. But Jordan and King Abdullah only came about a little bit later.
Great. Now, that's a good primer to my audience. And one of the other things that I then wanted to get into is the title. The title itself, when you approached me and you wanted me to talk on this book, I said, "Wait a minute, that's a very interesting title," because I can't say I knew as much as you do about the king, but I did know of some of his background, and I just didn't know the extent of it. So tell our audience here why you gave it that particular title, and just give them then maybe a primer as to the tenure between Abdullah since he came into office with the United States in general.
Sure. So King Abdullah has a unique relationship with the United States, both personally and politically. So personally, he went to school, both middle school and high school in Massachusetts at Deerfield Academy. He was on the wrestling team, and he would often go by the name Ab, not Abdullah, because he would want to fit in with the other guys. When his father asked him to do Arabic lessons, he would actually hide in the closet because he just wanted to be more of a normal, quote unquote, American student, even though, of course, he was Jordanian. Afterwards, he went to Georgetown University and so much enjoyed that experience, he sent his own children to the prestigious Jesuit college in Washington, D.C. He trained with the U.S. military in Kentucky. He even appeared on a Star Trek episode in California. And when he became king in 1999, he spoke far better English than Arabic because he spent so much time in the West. He went on his honeymoon in Hawaii and in New York, which shows just his deep connection to the United States. And then afterwards, even today, he still owns property both in the Washington, D.C. area and in California because he so much enjoys spending time here. But it's not just the personal relationship that he has with the United States. I found the title to be fitting, but it's also the political one. So, for example, King Abdullah was the first Arab leader to meet with both President Trump, President Biden, and President Obama in the White House. Jordan's often received nearly $1.5 billion in annual aid in recent years. And there are thousands of U.S. troops stationed in Jordan, both under Democratic and Republican administrations. The relationship between the CIA and Jordan's intelligence agency, the GID, is quite strong. And King Abdullah was also the first Arab leader to be invited to do a joint address before Congress. So the relationship with the United States and Jordan is very, very strong. And it's important to emphasize that I thought the title was appropriate because some people might argue that other Arab countries also have strong relationships with the United States. They might say Saudi Arabia or Qatar with the current administration. But what makes Jordan unique is how bipartisan it is and across many years. So, for example, Qatar does have a good relationship right now with the United States. But in 2017, there was a lot of tension. President Trump even called for an embargo against Qatar because he accused them of supporting terrorism. Now, Saudi
Yep.
Arabia, President Trump did visit a few months ago. But in the previous administration, President Biden accused the Saudi crown prince of being a pariah figure for the killing of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So King Abdullah has maintained very good relations with both Republicans and Democrats, and he's aided by his personal interactions with American society and his fluent English, so he's able to relate better with members of Congress and senior officials.
And you know what? You just bring to my attention when you start speaking of him in that light. This is a country that most people don't understand that they've had a close relationship for a long time, and like you said, on a very bipartisan basis. When a lot of people hear about Israel being the strongest ally in the Middle East, I also start thinking about Jordan. I said, "What about Jordan?" I mean, Jordan's been there for a while, through the thick and thin. And how do you see that Abdullah in general has been, like you said, from the beginning of his tenure, bipartisanly? But how have you seen the ebbs and flows go in on that in regards to like what president do you think kind of gave him the most issues and why?
Sure. So he has some challenges during his reign with certain U.S. leaders. I would say one of the example would be in 2003 with the U.S. invasion of Iraq. That was a challenging moment for Jordan because it was unknown if the war was going to be contained in Iraq or if it was going to spread into neighboring Jordan. But King Abdullah took a very different approach to the U.S. invasion of Iraq than his father did with the earlier U.S. war. So, for example, in the Gulf War in 1990, 1991, King Hussein strongly opposed it, and there was diplomatic clash with the United States. And after that, it caused a reduction of U.S. aid to Jordan. And Jordan's a very poor country that has no oil, so it very much needs Washington support. So King Abdullah in 2003, even though he wasn't a huge fan of the U.S. invasion, he allowed U.S. troops to be stationed in Jordan before that war. He allowed for overflight rights from Jordan into Iraq, intelligence gathering missions. And after the U.S. invasion, instead of the U.S. aid declining, it actually increased. So that would be one example of King Abdullah showing that he's very useful to the United States. He's a partner, and therefore Washington relies upon it. Now, I would say during the Obama administration, another example would be the gas accord that Jordan signed with Israel. This is the
Yep.
largest ever agreement. The United States strongly supported it, and Jordan, under King Abdullah's reign, did also sign it, even though many Jordanian citizens opposed it. So he said, I'm going to continue being a partner to the United States, and that was appreciated by the United States at the time. Another example during the Obama administration was the Syrian refugee crisis. There were hundreds of thousands of Syrians who were leaving, and the United States very much appreciated Jordan absorbing those refugees so they wouldn't flee then to Europe or the United States. So time and time again, King Abdullah has shown that he's a partner of the United States. And I would say the last example, both during the Biden administration and the Trump administration, was when Iran was firing missiles, hundreds of missiles over Jordanian airspace at Israel. And what Jordan did under King Abdullah's reign is he shot them down with his own air force and allowed U.S. troops stationed in Jordan to also shoot that down. And that was very much appreciated by the United States. And that's continued time and time again, both under Democratic and Republican administrations.
And you brought up the recent barrage of missiles from Iran, and that one, when I was monitoring it live, I thought to myself, I wonder how this is going to play out because I did see of those reports where Jordan was actually taking them down before they would even come into Israel. Whereas we also have seen maybe statements from Iran saying that if Saudi Arabia opens up its airspace or anybody opens up their airspace to allow Israel to come in and attack us, we'll attack you back. So there's been some pretty interesting statements made from Iran in that particular regard. So it's interesting just how it played out with Jordan. Didn't seem like they got a lot of slack for doing that. But also, you brought up the idea of economy, and that's one thing that you do highlight in your book very well. Can you give my audience a sense of like what is the economy about, as far as what's the GDP like there? And that is obviously an issue because of the high unemployment rate. But can you tell us about the ebbs and flows there from the tenure of Abdullah?
Sure. So the economy in Jordan is in a very difficult position. Just for comparison, the United States, many individuals are unhappy with the economy right now. In the United States, the unemployment rate is about 4.3, 4.5%. In Jordan, the unemployment rate is over five times that. It's over 20%. And it's been like that for many years. So there's just a huge challenge, especially for young Jordanians. A lot of them are actually well educated. They go to university, they have these engineering degrees, and then they leave and they have no jobs. Just an anecdote for you is during the Biden administration, there was this situation where Jordanians were flying to Mexico and they were trying to illegally migrate into the United States, and some actually successfully did, in order to just find jobs and have a better economic outlook. Of course, during the Trump administration, that is no longer a feasible possibility, so you haven't seen that continue. But the economy is just really poor. They rely to some degree on tourism because they don't have oil. And tourism, as you know, because of the 2023 Gaza war, even though Jordan's a very safe country and the violence hasn't really spread across its border, unfortunately, the number of tourists to the country has declined, even though they have a lot of religious Christian sites. But many people have just been concerned about the violence in the region. So they've been hurt by that. But unfortunately, Jordan doesn't have a very vibrant high tech sector. And I would say it's one of King Abdullah's, unfortunately, his greatest failures as leader. He came into power because he really wanted to focus on more of a Jordan first mentality. And he actually used that term over a decade before President Trump did, because he really wanted to focus on the economy, focus on his own national interests. And he inherited an economy that was very poor. It was about 25% unemployment, and it's now in a similar high range right now. So he's been unable to improve the economy in a significant way. He did have some success in the beginning of his reign. He was managed to lower the unemployment from about 25% to about 13%. But then the 2008 recession hit, and then the 2011 Arab Spring protests, the Syrian refugee crisis, the unemployment rate went up and up and up, and it's still at a very high point right now.
Now, a lot of people may not know that, Jordan does have to deal with a lot of, terrorists in the midst of Jordan. Now, you do also write about the clash between Abdullah and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, is that the biggest concern, or are there other threats as well, presently speaking?
So one concern, as you mentioned, is definitely the Muslim Brotherhood. And Jordan recently, under King Abdullah's decision, decided to ban them, which is a significant departure from his father, who had a more tolerant attitude towards the Muslim Brotherhood. King
Mhm.
Abdullah has been concerned and critical of the Muslim Brotherhood for decades now. He called them wolves in sheep's clothing and a Masonic cult about 10 years ago. One of his first acts as king in 1999 is he decided to expel senior Hamas leaders from Jordan. And Hamas has a very close relationship with the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood, because Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Palestinian territories. So there's been a lot of tensions with that. And there's some concerns that because the Muslim Brotherhood is now outlawed, perhaps they're going to engage in violence against the regime to protest that. So far, it's been a few months, and it's been a relatively quiet time in the country, even though the Muslim Brotherhood was banned. But that remains one challenge. Jordan still faces threats, whether it's from ISIS or Al Qaeda. They have faced some terror attacks in the past 25 years from those organizations, but I would say they've never been an existential threat to the country like they were in Syria and Iraq, partially too because Jordan's security forces are far more sophisticated than some of those other countries. They have a very close relationship with the CIA, with other Western intelligence agencies. King Abdullah invests significant effort and funding into the intelligence apparatus, and they've remained strong. And then I think also just the poor economic situation is a clear challenge to the king, because it might not be a challenge tomorrow or next month, but we've seen protests during his reign, and a lot of them focus on just the poor economic situation, corruption, just very few opportunities, whether that's the Arab Spring protests in 2011, there were protests in 2018 over a tax hike, in 2022 over energy prices. So if they're not able to long-term improve the economy and provide jobs for their citizens, then that could be a strategic threat to the regime's leadership.
Most definitely. Yeah, you hinted at that towards the end there, because there's been many times where you do see some of these protests, whether it's on social media or not. And as of recent, like I'm talking about since 2020, where you do see some of these protests spring up and you're thinking to yourself, okay, how bad can it get? And how bad is it over there? because you always think about that with a monarchy in the sense of that they can easily get overthrown if there's enough of a will from the situations that are being incurred. Now, another thing that I definitely wanted to talk about because the way they address the kingdom of Jordan is the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. So, what I want you to do for my audience that might not have any clue as to maybe even Islam, what kind of Islam is King Jordan? And also, when they say Hashemite, what does that mean? Just give us a good little primer there.
Sure. So King Abdullah and about 97 to 98% of the population is Sunni Muslim. So, for example, in contrast to Shia Islam that's practiced in Iran and parts of Lebanon and even parts of Syria, the vast majority of the population of Jordan is Sunni Muslim. So I should note for your listeners that Jordan does have a considerable population of Christians, and the treatment of Christians has been a key feature of King Abdullah's reign. So he is personally Sunni Muslim. He considers himself a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, along with his father, King Hussein, and that's a part of his legitimacy, along with his custodianship over the Jerusalem holy sites. In terms of the Hashemite kingdom, Hashemite is the family name, and it even goes to their connection to Saudi Arabia because the Jordanian leadership, many years ago, they were connected to the desert area in Saudi Arabia. So that's they have a religious legitimacy from being connected to the Prophet Muhammad. But I would say King Abdullah doesn't emphasize his religious laws in the same way that, for example, you see in Saudi Arabia before Mohammed bin Salman, where it'd be very strict in terms of a woman's right to drive or what a woman could wear. In Jordan, for example, women are allowed to dress however they want. There's no prohibition on them driving or traveling. So Jordan's is much more of a moderate stance in terms of religious practice.
And I appreciate that was a very good breakdown in regards to the type of Islam they are and what they represent. And I even caught how you said uh, Saudi before MBS, because that is very true. Before MBS came on the scene, it was very conservative.
Yeah, correct.
After MBS came on the scene as Crown Prince, he's more of a reformer now. And it's definitely on the more moderate leaning side as well. So, so yeah, no, that's good you made that distinction. Now, also, for the audience that may not know, you mentioned the connection between the Hashemites and also Mecca. They used to run Mecca until they gave it over to the kingdom of the House of Saud, essentially. But that's a very interesting breakdown. That's good that just so my audience knows, and I mean that's about what I expected as well from how you were going to break it down. But also, you mentioned Saudi a couple times already. One of the things that my audience may not know, that probably didn't watch some of those episodes where I covered it, is when it came on my radar that the Crown Prince was going to marry into the Saudi bloodline. Because it really caught my attention from the perspective of the fact that they were saying essentially this is like the cousin of MBS with the wife of the Crown Prince right now. Care to share any details on that one right there before we go? I do want to go into the Temple Mount next, so that's going to be the next follow-up question.
Sure. So the wife of the leader is certainly a very important question in a country like Jordan. So for history's sake, it's worth noting that King Hussein married an American woman, Queen Noor,
Yeah.
and she was very prominent in Western media. This is in the 1990s. King Abdullah married a Palestinian woman from Kuwait, and so that brought support from some Palestinians in the country, and then there has been criticism as well from some Jordanians who are concerned about the country's identity. So that has been the current king, and in the future one, the crown prince, he decided to marry, as you mentioned, a Saudi woman. She's actually a graduate of Syracuse University in New York. She majored in architecture, but she does have strong connections with the Saudi government. She comes from an elite family.
Yeah.
So that was a very clear sign by the crown prince that he wants to maintain his strong relations with the Arab world and specifically with Saudi Arabia, just because of the important role that the Gulf plays in the Hashemite kingdom.
Yeah, and before we get to the Temple Mount, I still want to focus in on Jordan a little bit here because one of the other things that I got from one of your other interviews, your recent interviews, is how you were talking about that the position of Jordan has typically been, and this is a very interesting contrast to what has been transpiring with Trump, but has typically been to push for a Palestinian state, but not wanting to take the Palestinians in. That's kind of like the hard no there. But most recently, we had statements being said by Donald Trump saying that they would take some of the Gazans into Jordan. Now, really, nothing ever really transpired after those statements. But I also didn't hear any like hard no from Abdullah. So, do you see that Abdullah might be wavering on it finally, or is it just a little, just something that was just not even taken seriously? How do you see that playing out?
Sure. So I would say that was a success of King Abdullah's diplomacy. He was the first Arab leader to meet in the White House with President Trump after the president proposed the large scale transfer of Palestinians from Gaza to Egypt and Jordan. And he said he was very firm that he supports President Trump. He called him a man of peace. And that was in contrast to the brouhaha that happened with Ukrainian President Zelensky, where there was a lot of tensions and he was kicked out of the White House. King Abdullah dealt with the affair diplomatically, discreetly. He praised President Trump, but at the same time, he said that there's no way Jordan's going to accept tens or hundreds of thousands of Gazans into the country. And for him, it's a national security threat. So for your listeners, some may know that in 1970, Jordan faced a civil war, which is called Black September, with Palestinian militants. And it caused thousands of individuals to be killed during that conflict. And what happened was Palestinian militants took over parts of the Jordanian country, and the Jordanian regime needed to take it back from the Palestinian militants, and it led to a very severe clash. So for Jordan now to take hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, including potentially Hamas militants in the country, that could lead to another clash similar to Black September, and they are not interested in that at all. Additionally, King Abdullah would be viewed as betraying the Palestinian cause if he were to empty out Gaza's population, so he wouldn't want to do that in a public way. Now, he's still willing to partner with the United States on the Israeli-Palestinian issue or on Israeli security in general, and you saw that with Jordan shooting down the Iranian missiles. And also, King Abdullah has maintained the 1994 peace treaty, even though it's widely unpopular with Israel at the time. But there are certain red lines, and one of them is the transfer of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians into his country.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up that particular situation of trying to avoid another civil war. A lot of people did not know that. I kind of knew about that. I didn't know about all the details that you went into right there. But also, in regards to something that I've mentioned on the show before, not just from the perspective of Jordan, because I've seen where their stance. He's been pretty adamant. I must say that from the Middle Eastern perspective, he hasn't really wavered on a lot of his fundamentals. I mean, it's not like he changes from one season to another. He's been pretty solid. He's been one direction. He makes a yeah. That's how I can remember Abdullah. It's not like I look one day and he's saying this thing, and I look another day and he's saying something else. No, he's been pretty steadfast. But when you mention the idea that he does not want to take Palestinians in because that would go against the Palestinian cause, that's another thing that I've highlighted that kind of goes in line with most of the Sunni majority Arab nations, because if they started to take them in, then they wouldn't be able to part the land. So that's what I see happening here. There's going to be a strong push, as we just already saw with France and Saudi Arabia, and now I'm trying to see how this is going to start to play out with the ceasefire agreement. And with that said, before we get to the Temple Mount, I did see that recently, as of today, because today is October 9th, 2025, the day that, we have a ceasefire deal that has been yet to be signed by the Israeli government. That's where we're at right now. It's not yet signed it's not official from the Israeli government. But I did want to point out a tweet that you had from the foreign minister of Jordan. Now, I wanted to take some time to actually read it all because, it's pretty important for today. Now, this is, I don't even know how to pronounce this gentleman's name. Can you pronounce it for us, the foreign minister of Jordan?
Ayman al-Safadi.
Yes, I'm glad. I knew you were going to nail it. But this man right here posted the following tweet that you reposted, and he says the following here: "We welcome the agreement of the ceasefire in Gaza and the exchange deal. The agreement must be implemented. Jordan greatly values the decisive role of the U.S. President Donald Trump in reaching the agreement and his commitment to end the war, ensure delivery of humanitarian aid, prevent displacement, like we just talked about, rebuild Gaza, not allow annexation of the West Bank." And that's another thing I saw. A lot of the Arab world, they saw that being, talked about, and they're like, whoa, 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 like the red flags went up everywhere. Like, no, No, don't let them take West Bank. And so we did, that's interesting that he mentions that. It says, and advance efforts to achieve peace. We appreciate the relentless Egyptian and Qatari efforts. We also value the role Turkey. I was just going to say he better throw in Turkey there because I hear Erdogan personally was dealing with this matter. Jordan will continue to work with our regional and international partners to ensure sufficient delivery of humanitarian aid in cooperation with UN organizations. We are ready to resume aid delivery as soon as Israel lists obstacles facing this most urgent of priorities. We will also continue to work with our partners to launch an irreversible path. That's what catches my attention. All right. Launching, I like how they word this stuff, man. An irreversible path. I've been saying since 2020, we're gonna get to a deal. And it's the final countdown, and there's no going back. And I like how they say irreversible path to a just peace on the basis of the two-state solution, man. And we just heard from Mahmoud Abbas. And let me just finish this statement, but we'll talk about Mahmoud in a little bit and the relationship with Abdullah. It says here, the war must end. And I've been telling my audience, it has to end before we do anything else. Humanitarian aid must flow unhindered and work to rebuild Gaza must begin. Now, with that said, we just talked about the two-state solution there with the foreign minister. That is still going to be something that's not going away. That's clearly a talking point that will remain until something truly happens in that regard. And Saudi Arabia has made it a prerequisite before they normalize with Israel. And the book of Joel tells us how this one's going to end. But you know what? I wanted to get into this now. How has Abdullah's relationship been with the Palestinian Authority, the PA, with their previous leaders and also the current one, Mahmoud Abbas, which I feel should be replaced by now? But yeah, Mahmoud Abbas came out with a statement today saying that I hope with this ceasefire deal we can get a Palestinian state. And I know where he's headed with this. But can you tell our audience the relationship between Jordan? Because see, you mentioned Palestinians. What a lot of people need to understand is that there's like extremist Palestinian factions that are more militant, but there's also Jordan deals very well with the Palestinian Authority. So can you go into that?
Sure. So as you mentioned, Jordan has a warmer relationship with the Palestinian Authority and with Fatah and with President Mahmoud Abbas than with the other Palestinian faction, which would be Hamas. So there's been a lot of tensions between Jordan and Hamas. And in general, unlike Iran or even Qatar, the Jordanian government hasn't been publicly praising Hamas throughout the war. They don't want to praise Israel, of course, but they feel much more comfortable with Fatah and the PA because the PA pushes more of a diplomatic approach and less of violence, and they don't want to be working with a Palestinian partner that's promoting violence because the violence is often not just in the West Bank and Gaza, but it often spreads into Jordan. And some of your listeners might know that, but there have been multiple attacks by Jordanian citizens at Israelis, mainly at the Allenby border crossing during the past 2 years have killed a number of Israelis. And that puts the Jordanian government in a very difficult spot because they're supposed to be providing security at the border crossings. And then when one of their citizens or multiple of their citizens then shoots and kills Israelis, they are not very comfortable with that. So they prefer the diplomatic approach with the PA. I would say one reason also it's important to emphasize Jordan's role is because of Jordan's demographics. Now, Jordan has the largest number of Palestinians in the Arab world outside the West Bank and Gaza. Now,
I see. I was unaware of that, so that's good. See, yeah, you had this. Yeah, that's a very vital statement right there.
now, estimates say it's about 50%, but because it's such a sensitive issue in Jordan, the government doesn't officially release a number of how
Ah,
many Palestinians there are, but some speculate it could be even higher than 50%,
yeah,
60%, or even more.
yep.
And when you go to Jordan, you'll see many of the individuals, whether you're in a taxi or just hanging out with friends, a lot of them will often talk about their Palestinian heritage. So for Jordan, the Palestinian issue isn't just a religious one, or a political one, but it's also one that people have family and friends across the border. But in general, as you say correctly, Jordan does have a very productive relationship with the Palestinian Authority and promotes their approach, which is the two-state solution through peace and negotiations, and not the one that Hamas is promoting.
Yes, yes, yeah. People, I hope they should be able to come with a conclusion to that because of what they've seen transpire with the war. But yeah, no, that's good. I definitely wanted to make that distinction. But also now, because we talked about how Jordan deals with the Christian population that is in Jordan, but not only in Jordan, like you said, a lot of people, I will mention this not only for my audience, but just in general, I would imagine in the world, when they look at Israel, they might look at some of those holier areas of, I'm talking about the Temple Mount, I'm talking about the Dome of the Rock, the Al Aqsa Mosque. They might not ever consider the fact that Jordan is actually the custodian of those sites and not Israel. So for the sake of my audience, can you give them a little bit of a primer as to how that all came about and where you see that headed?
Sure. So, as part of the 1994 peace treaty between Jordan and Israel, a special section included Jordan's custodianship and or special relationship in Jerusalem. So, part of that includes their connection with the Al Aqsa Mosque and the Waqf, which is the governing body. And Jordan provides both political and financial support for this organization. So, it helps fund repair projects, whether at the Al Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, or mosques across East Jerusalem, but also politically, when they view that Israeli ministers or Israeli officials are crossing a red line in Jerusalem, and from what they view as a threatening stance by ministers, for example, praying at the Temple Mount or engaging in acts that what the Jordanian government views as threatens the Islamic status of that sensitive spot, they will often use it politically to advocate for the Palestinian cause on that sensitive spot with the United States or other Western powers. So they have a significant role with the Muslim population, but also with the Christian population in East Jerusalem, with the Palestinian Christians. That King Abdullah will often meet with Christian leaders from East Jerusalem to hear their side of the story. He'll fund projects in East Jerusalem to help the churches that are sometimes facing challenging finances. So Jordan takes this cause very seriously, and it's part of his legitimacy in his country internally is that he plays this important role in Jerusalem, which, because of Jordan's population, as I mentioned, is about 50% Palestinians. Many citizens have a very strong connection to the Al Aqsa Mosque and to Jerusalem in general.
Yes, and I'm glad you went into that because a lot of people, let me tell you, I can imagine most people. It came to me as a shock when I first understood it, but most people probably don't understand that when they look at these sites, it's not Israel responsible for them; it's Jordan, and that was a real zinger when I found that out. But recently, I will mention it really caught my attention as to the speech that Abdullah made while at the UN General Assembly recently in September, just last month. One of the statements that he said, I'm going to read it from the Times of Israel that kind of cited him here. It said, Jordan's Abdullah. He said, Israel's government is no peace partner. So he kind of came, what I was watching it live. So it kind of caught me a little off guard. It was a little more harsh of him to say.
Hmm.
For also being a peace partner still, he said Israel's government is no peace partner. Its greater Israel call would violate neighbors' sovereignty. Its Al Aqsa rhetoric will spark religious war. So, listen, when he said that, I said, man, those are some bold words. What do you think Jordan was trying to get at here?
Sure. So King Abdullah has a lot of tensions with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and this isn't just about the Gaza war, though it has been exacerbated in the past 2 years. But since Prime Minister Netanyahu returned to power in 2009, there have been a series of tensions. So Crown Prince Hussein of Jordan actually wanted to visit Jerusalem and visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Israeli security forces actually prevented him from doing so. So Jordanians
I
were not
remember
appreciative
that.
of
Yeah.
that. So that would be
Yeah.
one example. There was another example where an Israeli security guard in Amman shot and killed two Jordanians, and that was quite controversial at the time. The Israelis said that the Jordanians were trying to stab and kill them, and they were acting in self-defense. The Jordanians argued that the Israeli security officer was acting, recklessly and inappropriately. And then after that incident, Prime Minister Netanyahu warmly embraced his security guard, and that even further angered the Jordanians. So there was that incident. Uh, if we go back all the way to the 1990s, when Prime Minister Netanyahu was first in power, there was the incident where he tried to kill Khaled Mashal, the senior Hamas official who was in Jordan at the time. And this was right after the peace treaty was signed under King Hussein. And that was wildly unpopular in Jordan because they said, we signed a peace treaty with you and now you're killing a Hamas operative in our country. The Israelis argued that they were just trying to combat terrorism, but that is just a series of incidents between the Israeli government, between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Jordanian government, both under King Hussein and under King Abdullah, that just left very little goodwill between the two leaders. But I would say at the same time, King Abdullah has preserved the security cooperation between the two countries, security, intelligence services, and militaries. So one example would be, as we mentioned a few times, the shooting down of the Iranian missiles, which was critical because that saved dozens or hundreds of Israeli lives from Israel's perspective. Another example would be an Axios report last year where Jordan security forces was operating as a mediator between Israel and the Syrian leadership after Assad was toppled. And because Jordan had a unique relationship with both sides. So time and time again, King Abdullah has been playing this delicate balancing act, preserving the peace treaty, preserving the multi-billion-dollar gas deal, continuing the security cooperation, but at the same time harshly criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu, calling for the Gaza war to end. And then also he removed, for example, the Israeli ambassador from Amman and recalled the Jordanian ambassador from Tel Aviv. So he's been playing a lot of these steps in order to try to appease different crowds. So on the one hand, his population, about 50% Palestinian, but overwhelmingly against Israeli war in Gaza. On the other hand, he needs to maintain a good relationship with the United States and Congress, and because of Washington providing Amman nearly $1.5 billion in annual aid. So he can't go too far in one direction or another. In this delicate balancing act, I think he's been doing pretty well.
Yes, I also think that as well. It's one of those things that when he mentioned that, I was thinking of some of these dynamics that are at play, like you mentioned, and it is indeed for Jordan. It's because of also their placement, their geography. It's like they are playing a tight balancing act, just simply based upon where they're at in the geography of it all. Like I've said to my audience for a while now, the real wild card in the region is Sunni Iran, that they can just kind of flare up, and all of a sudden the whole Middle East is trying to scramble essentially. But one of as we start closing out here, in general, you have a chapter dedicated to Abdullah's legacy after 25 years in power. In general, here's a two-pronged question. Like in general, just in a couple words, how would you describe Abdullah? And also, how do you see the future playing out, not only with his kingdom, but also with the relationship between America, because he's an American king, right? The most American king, but his future now with the trajectory of this new development with the Gaza ceasefire. So let's start with like, how would you just describe him with his tenure? And then also, how then do you see his kingdom playing out with not only America, but also Israel?
Sure. So in terms of his overall tenure and his legacy, I would say it's mixed. So on the one hand, he's provided stability for his country. As you mentioned, Jordan's in a very difficult region. It's surrounded by Israel, the West Bank, Syria, Iraq. There's been so many conflicts, so many wars. And while whether in Syria, the refugees are flowing from Syria into Jordan because Jordan's an island of stability, and same with Iraq. So he's been able to provide his country with that stability, and there hasn't been a single war in his country during his over 25 years of reign. So that's definitely been a major success. I would say another success of King Abdullah is his treatment of minorities, especially the Christian population, has been very good. King Abdullah has appointed senior government officials who are Christian. One example would be former Foreign Minister Mohan Muasher. Same within the military. He meets with Christian leaders. He wishes, Merry Christmas. In general, Christians have a much higher degree of freedom than in many other Arab countries in the region. So that is definitely a positive as well. I would say his biggest failures would be on the economics front, and just the inability to provide jobs for his people, the insufferable unemployment rate, over 20% for so many years. For many Jordanian citizens, it's nice that they're not getting bombed, but they want to also have jobs, have a better future, and not have to flee their country to go to the Gulf, whether that's the UAE or Saudi Arabia. So the economic challenges has been pretty severe. And then finally, he has promised repeatedly that he was going to transition his country from more of an authoritarian regime to more of a democracy, and having a strong parliament. He even said that he would like his son to lead a similar style that the United Kingdom has. But unfortunately, Jordan, under his reign, has not really moved in that democratic direction. the largest opposition party, which is Islamic Action Front, they did very well in the recent elections. They won the most seats, but then they were banned a few months later. So then citizens question what's the purpose of participating in democracy if you just get banned a few months after doing well. The Economist ranks country in a 4 different ranks in terms of their democratic level, and Jordan's the lowest one in terms of authoritarian. King Abdullah continues to appoint and dismiss prime ministers, even though he promised he would stop doing that and allow parliament to do it. King Abdullah continues to appoint every single member of the Senate, so every bill has to basically be approved by him in order to pass legislature. So time and time again, Jordan has proven that it's not really moving in the democratic direction. I would say that another clear example of that would be, why did it take over 20 years for someone to write a book about King Abdullah? It's because if someone in Jordan were to have written this book that were to be anything critical, he would have ended up in jail. Um, and it takes, unfortunately, an outsider to write it because the Jordanian government can't jail me from living in Maryland. Now, in terms of
Valid point. Good point.
Now, in terms of the future of Jordan after the Gaza ceasefire, I think the Hashemite kingdom is really pleased with the move. As you read the statement by the foreign minister, there have been a lot of protests in the country. There have been accusations of weapon smuggling. There have been attacks since the Gaza war started. And they see that if the ceasefire is going to be permanent, which we all hope, that's going to lower the temperature of anger among many citizens in the country. And people are going to not be protesting as much, but more just trying to get a job and doing kind of more regular activities. So they are quite appreciative of this, and they think this is going to be improving their country's stability if this ceasefire does hold. In terms of the long-term trajectory with the United States, as we noted, the Crown Prince, like his father, he speaks fluent English. He's met multiple times with President Trump, President Biden. He feels very comfortable in the United States. He went to
He was
Georgetown.
just here. He just met
Yep,
with JD
just
Vance.
here.
Yeah.
He just met with senior U.S. officials. He went to Georgetown University, graduated. Uh, so I see under Crown Prince Hussein continuing the trajectory of King Abdullah and having a very strong priority of the United States in his foreign policy.
Yeah, no, I see the same as far as the Crown Prince is concerned. So now, listen, thank you for your wealth of information on the land of Jordan. And like I said, to my audience, get to know the Middle East. Why? Because I tell them, we talk about Bible prophecy, and it's all about Israel. It's all about Israel and the neighbors around Israel. Jordan is clearly one of those big ones, you know, outside of Lebanon, outside of Syria. Those are some big ones as well, but Jordan for
Israel's
sure.
longest border is Jordan, so it's
Yeah,
a critical
yeah, a lot of
country.
people don't know that. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. So the idea is you should want to know about these characters, and who better than the sovereign who leads it, than King Abdullah. So listen, with all that said, go ahead and plug your book. Where can they get it? And also your social media, Aaron. Let people know where they can check out some of your work.
Sure. So if you're interested in for the deep dive on King Abdullah, I would strongly encourage you to buy the book. You can get it at my publisher's website. The publisher is called Universal Publishers. You can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Kindle, a Google ebook. So those are the ways to get the book. I've seen it sold in a few stores, but it's probably not sold in every store in the country, unfortunately. In addition to that, you can follow my work on Twitter at Aaron Magid, LinkedIn as well. And then I also have a podcast entirely focused on Jordanian politics. So it's called On Jordan. We have had professors from Jordan, journalists, ambassadors posted in the country. So I try to get a wide spectrum of Jordanian society, both in terms of the domestic politics and the foreign policy and its relationship with the United States. So those are some of the ways. And then I continue writing articles in various online publications.
Yeah, no, I'll be on the lookout for. I'll try to subscribe to your podcast now. But at the same time, you did mention you have a lot of people on that podcast, and what I forgot to mention about your book is that, listen, one of the questions people might ask is that, did you get to interview the king yourself? What's your answer to that, and maybe why was that? But also, I forgot to mention you have over like 100 different interviews. You have 100 different sources, high quality sources, cited in your book. So give us a little bit of the numbers there, as far as how many did you interview for this book, and what happened with Abdullah not wanting to get interviewed.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I did speak with over 100 individuals, including King Abdullah's classmates in the United States, because he spent so much time here. I also spoke with former Jordanian ministers. I spoke with a few former CIA directors because of the special relationship between Washington and Amman, former U.S. ambassadors to Amman, former Jordanian journalists, and current Jordanian journalists as well. So, I tried to get that wide perspective on the country. As you mentioned, I tried repeatedly to reach out to the royal court to secure an interview with the king. Unfortunately, he did not agree. At least that's what the royal court said. It's not really surprising because after the 2013, he gave an interview with the Atlantic magazine, and it caused a lot of tensions in the country over his comments about the tribes and the Muslim Brotherhood, along with regional leaders. And
Yeah.
since that 2013 interview, he's been a lot more reluctant to speak, especially about domestic Jordanian politics. He'll do interviews with large publications about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or ISIS or Syrian refugee crisis, but not so much about domestic Jordanian politics. And it was not surprising, therefore, that he declined to do the interview.
And listen, you okay? One last question before we end, because you did bring up the amount of interviews. Now, there was a couple interesting citations that you had there. What was your like you could say one or two most interesting citations that you got to learn about Abdullah that you previously did not know that you disclosed in your book? Can you list some of those that really caught your attention? It's like, wow, this is interesting. Didn't know that about this man.
Sure. So one example, I spoke with the former U.S. ambassador to Amman, and he was posted in the country during 9/11. And what he told me, which had not been publicly revealed before that, was King Abdullah was in the air flying to the United States as the 9/11 attacks was happening, and he was trying, and he wanted to continue flying into the United States during during the hours after the attack. And the U.S. ambassador had to persuade him that this was a terrible idea because, of course, the United States had closed its airspace at the time. And while Jordan's a very important regional country for the United States, the focus of the United States at the time was 9/11, New York, Washington, just figuring out who Osama bin Laden was. Every other issue was secondary. So what happened was he had told King Abdullah, no, no, you can't come and visit right now. This is not a good time. But King Abdullah insisted, no, I need to come. He said, I need to be an Arab leader to show that we're against terrorism, which was a nice idea and I'm sure would have been theoretically supportive, but he wouldn't listen. And then what happened was his wife, Queen Rania, had to call the U.S. ambassador and say, hey, you need to really convince King Abdullah, my husband, that this is not going to work. So then he had another phone call, and finally, after the Queen's intervention with the U.S. ambassador, they were finally able to convince him that he wasn't able to fly over. But those are some of the personal anecdotes that I found interesting speaking with a lot of former government officials.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. I personally didn't know about either. But listen, thanks, Aaron, for your time. I think we could wrap it up there. And like I said, if you want to learn about the leader of Jordan, I can't think of any other book than yours right now, for sure. And it's chock full of just facts and just giving a history. And like I said, let's keep our eyes on Jordan, man, because as you were mentioning, the idea that all these presidents have met this man, he's been in relationships with America for a long time, he's been involved with America, grew up in America. The idea that when people talk about Israel as one of the strongest allies, Jordan's right there as well, man. They've been steadfast with America, as you could see from what you've been telling us. So, like I said, I tell my audience, it's what a time to be alive in regards to also seeing how things are developing with some of these key players. Jordan is most definitely a key player when it comes to what I tell people. The holiest site in the Bible is Mount Moriah, which they call the Temple Mount today. So when you're talking about the fact that Jordan is responsible for it, keep an eye on Jordan. So with that said, I think we could wrap it up there. And thank you for your time, Aaron. And listen, you're always welcome back with any new titles you have in the work.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.